Okay, so if we've forwarded the option of not telling, that kind of begs the question, why ever tell?
Mm-hmm.
So Natasha, what would be some reasons why you would you know, even be willing to explore with your clients the possibility of telling? What would be some reasons to tell?
Well, there's lots of reasons. I think right off the bat, I think about showing up. I mean, most of us want to be able to show up, and the kind of the tag word we use a lot is authenticity, and that's a very popular word, in faith transition circles. I want to feel authentic. I want to be authentic. I think most of us who grew up in a Mormon context have values that really prioritize things such as honesty and integrity. And so we carry those with us even into our faith transitions. And so feeling like we can't be who we are or talk about what we think is important or express ourselves or share our beliefs then has consequences too. So one of those consequences, and this is something that I want, if there's believing people who are listening to us, that I want them to understand, is that consequences of shutting down those conversations is that you are just naturally limiting the level of intimacy you will be able to have with any person that you're uncomfortable having any conversation with. Now, granted, sometimes there's good reasons, like we talked about, to have those boundaries, and it's okay to not have a level 10 intimacy with everybody, right? So some people you might have a level 5 intimacy with, or a level 6 intimacy with, or level 8 or 9. So that's perfectly fine, but you will be limiting the level of intimacy and vulnerability that somebody can share with you. The other thing too is that I think that there are real issues for mental health again. So the less likely we can show up, the more increase there is in anxiety, possibly depression, feeling isolated, relational health issues such as marriages and parenting. All of those things cause, of course, sadness and distress, which we can be resilient about and we can find other ways to manage. And at the same time, it's important to recognize that if we don't fix those things right in the relationships that matter most to us, those will have some negative consequences as well. So that's just off the top of my head, but we could, probably dissect into a lot of those.
Yeah.
So true.
That last one you mentioned about mental health, it's a really big one. And honestly, when we talk about sharing the term coming out, not just with faith crisis situations, but also with the LGBT community, I think there are fair parallels in the sense that anytime you're living in the closet, anytime you're living in a box, you're hiding who you are. There's shame in that. Shame is not good. You're hiding. You're often filtering. It takes a lot of mental energy and emotional energy to hide things. Yeah. You're always in fear of being discovered. Living in fear is not healthy. Mm-hmm. Oftentimes you're lying, and lying, I just would argue, is bad for your mental health. And all this stuff causes anxiety and ultimately depression because you're not being who you are. And just like, authenticity is often compared to stepping out into the sunlight. Not coming out is kind of like staying in a dark closet for a long period of time. And we just know we need sunlight, the vitamin D from sunlight, and air and oxygen. And without light and oxygen, things die. And that's true for plants. And I think that's true for humans. Mm-hmm. And so at the end of the day, I think it's just unhealthy. Mm-hmm. Now, there are lots of different ways to come out, and there are right and wrong ways, or healthy and less levels. Healthy, and different levels of coming out.
Maybe not a full disclosure or. Mm-hmm.
But I rarely recommend, with something as important as religion, just kind of living in the closet forever. I think it can lead to depression, anxiety, autoimmune diseases, serious diseases, I think, can come from living too long in fear and in the closet and with shame.
I so agree.
I think it wreaks havoc on your physical and mental health.
Yeah. And I think particularly I so see that. And I see that in your story as being part of that perfect storm that made you come to me and kind of share that evening as well. But another thing that comes to mind, particularly, I guess this would be most in marriages, but also it's this idea of growth mindset, right? That there comes a time when in the hiding and the kind of process of keeping it in the dark, if you will, that you're kept stagnant. You're kept kind of in this place where you cannot move forward. And so I also like this idea of, philosophically or ethically feeling like I'm born here, I'm born to grow, I'm made to sort of move forward. And I want that. And I want that for myself, but I also want to try for that in my relationship with my partner. And this is one way that it's an opportunity for that.
I love that quote. If a man or a woman arrives at 50 with the same point of view they had when they were 20, they basically wasted 30 years.
Right. Well, and I think what we're saying too, just to be clear, is that even when we're saying it may not be helpful to disclose to certain people or at certain times of your life to certain people, I think what we're definitely saying is that it's important to disclose to somebody, you know, and again, even if that's just a mental health professional, that's where you start, like where we started to begin with. It is important to be your honest, authentic self in some space that you're creating in your life. So to be completely in the dark, completely in the closet, so to speak, is we have research to support that will only elicit mental health and physical health concerns, like John just mentioned.
We got a great comment from Wendy that goes to, I think, the point of authenticity and family. She writes, could you speak to this phenomenon about why we feel so responsible for how family members will feel about our transition and the exaggerated attempt to control how everyone in the family will respond to our personal choices? Isn't part of our personal development about having the difficult and vulnerable conversations so we can live a more authentic life? Isn't life asking us to grow up in our diplomacy skills and our relational skills, and I would even add in our differentiation skills?
For sure.
I think Wendy brings a good point. What do you say to Wendy, Natasha?
I say this is Mormonism 101. This is what we've been taught to do, is to is to caretake and to pretend that we're all fragile creatures
and mesh. And
to outsource our worthiness and okayness. It's like we ask people tell us all the time.
I'm okay. Are you okay? Am I okay? Am I okay?
Right?
Am I okay?
We have hierarchy that kind of fills in. So, and it's deeply tribal. We're wired this way.
And I want to point. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Margie.
Well, I love that last point of kind of the growth piece. And, you know, it may not feel comfortable in that moving forward to develop authenticity and differentiation. And yet it is what the opportunity at hand. So.
Yeah. And I like to tease our own culture, right? So, I mean, I'm just kind of making, when you're part of a culture, you can tease it, right? So I think that we do tend to focus a lot on protection of others. That also is high on our values. Being kind, being generous, being caretakers. Mormon women in particular get a lot of messaging around this concept of taking care of other people's feelings at the expense oftentimes of our own, and why oftentimes in Mormon culture we see some boundary issues and mental health implications that go along with that. So I oftentimes try to say, it's not like we're a culture that has it out for everybody and says we must be enmeshed. I mean, these things come from, I think, well-intentioned spaces. We do want to be caring people. But one of the consequences to that is that we don't do as well with differentiation skills. We tend to be what I call protection focused instead of intimacy focused. Mm-hmm. And even though protecting somebody may feel like a good intent and you want to be protective of others, what you're really doing in a protective stance is making decisions for another person instead of allowing them the empowerment to like she's saying, like Wendy's saying, to differentiate themselves, to empower themselves, and to manage their own feelings about how you are now showing up in their life. So I tease in good, in good fun. At the same time, it's very understandable why these things happen.
That's good, Natasha.
What I hear you saying is you can, with a motive of protecting, you can limit their growth, or just offend them or hurt them or deprive them of any sort of opportunity, right?
Yes. And I think too, to Wendy's point of, why are we uncomfortable? In the sense of when somebody else is hurting, that elicits discomfort in us. First of all, I'm glad that's happening, because otherwise you're antisocial and you've got other issues going on. You've got a personality disorder. Right. So there's nothing necessarily wrong in feeling discomfort at somebody else's pain, especially when what you just said or what you just shared elicits that pain. So we need to understand that that's a normal response. How do we tolerate it? That's what differentiation skills are about. How do we learn how to tolerate that discomfort, sit with it instead of run away from it? A lot of people just in that moment cut off communication because they don't want to sit with that pain.
Yes.
And that limits our growth.
Yes.
I'm going to read a comment from Kristen Gluth Cranny. We love Kristen's comments along with her sister. She writes, I know the situation is so different for different people, but one thing I've discovered recently with coming out to friends is that being open and honest can be very healing. I decided that giving voice to my journey is important. If a true believing friend sincerely wants to know what is going on and personally asks me, I tell them that I am reserved to share my story with them and other believing members because I don't want to offend them. But if they truly want to hear my story and journey as an honest seeker of truth, and they don't mind hearing hard things, I will share. Both of my friends I've shared with appreciated me asking permission to share things that are hard for them to hear. At the end of the conversation, I say that I know this was hard for them to hear and sincerely thank them for their love and concern for me. Their response usually is, well, I asked for it, and grateful that I was honest. My journey has been a painful one, so I decided it deserves my voice and honesty. This is my part in trying to create change for good in the church. I don't want friends or others thinking I left the church because I was offended or I just got too busy. That doesn't reflect me at all. So for me, speaking my truth and not making excuses has been good when done in a respectful way with those I feel are friends who are genuinely wanting to know. That's a great framework.
It is.
Shout out to Kristen. You're awesome, Kristen.
I like the question.
Yeah.
It's a nice addition.
Yeah. So that's a beautiful summary. How about this, Natasha and Margi? I'm going to read a comment someone posted, and we've kind of addressed this, but I just want to tackle it head on. Eileen writes, Eileen Marmon, one Sunday, after attending all the tedious meetings and listening to repetitive testimonies, I sat down in front of my husband at the kitchen table, looked him in the eye and said, I can't do this anymore. I was terrified of what he would say. He looked up at me and said, neither can I. I had my husband's support. He had wanted to do this for a long time, but wasn't sure how I would respond. Our children were married or going to school, and it paved the way for us by leaving the church a few years ago. I'm grateful that our family is on the same page now regarding the truth claims of the church. We are all very fortunate in that regard. So it's this idea, and this goes to what Kristen was saying, but also Natasha, what you were saying. What if a motive to come out is people deserve to know the truth, or at least to know other perspectives around the church and truth, and some may even be secretly where you are. And so one of the reasons to come out, number one, is to educate other people so that they can see the world through at least a different perspective, if not potentially a more accurate one. I know that's going to be controversial, but also for those coming out as an act of altruism for those who are privately or secretly struggling. It lets other people know they're not alone. It lets other people know you're an ally. And the more that people come out, the more it builds a genuine awareness, or a general awareness in the church culture, that smart, honest, good people are questioning and leaving, so that so many people aren't stuck in silence and in the closet out of fear. There's kind of this strength in numbers idea. And so what do you guys think about the idea? Margi, I'll ask you first. Coming out as an act of altruism or courage or support for others who either want to know or are hiding in secret out of fear.
Well, I think this is an example of, I can, where it can work. It can work. So I feel for that. And I think I understand the gist of what you're saying. And there is great potential there. But I would fall back to the elephant kind of idea, that coming out and giving information, or, trying to kind of build this kind of meta reality, can also backfire. I would go by, again, level of relationship and emotional connection, because emotions are kind of where we live and where we're changed, as opposed to kind of facts. So that is always, effectiveness to me is always going to fall back to kind of the quality and nature of the emotional intimacy in that relationship. That's just me, though. Natasha, what would you say?
Well, as you're talking, John, it reminds me again of some parallels with the LGBTQ plus community, in that, I think that there were a lot of discussions amongst those folks, 20, 30 years ago, where they started saying, if we continue to live in the closet, less people know we're there, less people, we continue to stay marginalized. So there was kind of this call to come out and to be authentic and to be forthcoming. And many LGBTQ plus individuals have done that and have been part of kind of that movement of pride and empowerment. And as they have done that, and those of us who are straight or cisgender get to know more people like that, then walls do start coming down, and there's more understanding and potential for bridging divides. So I think that that's a good call. I just want to give a big and to this, is that you need to make sure that first of all, if you're in a closet, so to speak, it is not necessarily your responsibility to manage this type of social change. You can be part of social change. And if that's empowering to you and if that's helpful to you, great. But I just want to, be careful, because again, if it doesn't go well, if you're not in a good space yourself, if you're vulnerable, putting that level of responsibility on yourself can actually be more harmful than helpful. So for some, I think that's an empowering way to face the world and say, you know what, I'm going to come out, I'm going to share things with people. The more people that come out, the more the society gets to know there's a lot of us out here. We're not as isolated. We're kind of forcing, and we are seeing that in, I think, Mormon circles, that more and more people do know somebody who has left, or who has gone through a faith transition, or who is in the ward but kind of has a nuanced position, and more people are having to come to grips with those realities. And yet always, always, always prioritize self-care first. So if you're not in a position where you can do that, or that leaves you more vulnerable, choose yourself first.
And then I would say relationships second. The relationships come before activism.
For sure.
I mean, not everyone's going to feel that way. Some people are going to feel called to be an activist, even if it destroys all the relationships of those close to them. And we can't sit in judgment of that. But I just want to say, in my experience, you want to choose family and love and relationships over trying to save the world. That's just my opinion.
And relationship to self. I love that you put that in there, Natasha. It's not other people centered either. It actually starts with you and your awareness of yourself and where you are, for sure.
Now, Margi, your brother Tim writes, I'm hesitant to say that you should be a banner for other people in such a personal matter. And that's fair, Tim. And I hope people don't feel like I'm saying that's what everyone should do. I'm bringing up the point because sometimes when you come out, it really does help other people either find someone who can help them when they're struggling alone, even with suicidal thoughts, the act of coming out can be a balm for people, help them know that they're not alone, and it can help educate. I remember the Harvey Milk movie, if any of you saw Milk, and they're trying, in the 70s, trying to spread awareness and support about the LGBT dilemma. And there's this point where Harvey Milk picks up the phone to all his closeted gay, volunteers and activists and says, come out to your family and friends, because when one of them knows one of us, they vote for us 2-1. In other words, if the LGBT people were ever going to get legislation passed to support the rights of LGBT people, they first needed to come out. And we all know it's happened to me and Margie. When Margie's cousin Scott came out to us as gay, things were never the same for us. We had sympathies before, but when it was Scott, when it was personal, it was totally different. And so it can have that effect. So we're not saying everyone should do it recklessly. We're not saying everyone should trigger the backfire effect by shoving it in everyone's faces. You should be careful about if you do it, how you do it, where you do it, when you do it, with whom you do it, and we'll be covering all that more and more. But there is a trade-off. There are some altruistic social benefits to coming out that help other people. And sometimes you can think you're helping people, but really you're just being selfish, and you're alienating relationships and pushing people through the backfire effect to become even more resilient in their beliefs. So it's tricky.
It is tricky.
But we're glad Tim spoke up.
Just 2 thoughts I would give really quick. So the Family Acceptance Project, if people want to look that up, has a great pamphlet that talks about, it's geared towards LGBTQ plus support, but it has a great pamphlet actually geared towards LDS families. And in it, it has what are considered rejecting behaviors and accepting behaviors. So I would just point that out as a resource that can be definitely applicable to faith transitions. And it also shares a lot of the research that John mentioned earlier about how rejecting behaviors can lead to mental health concerns. The other thing that I think, I just think about, so Oasis is a secular community that also deals with faith transitions of other faiths. And their big mantra is people are more important than beliefs. And I think, again, it's really important to remember that as believers and as transitioners, because both sides of the table, like Margie mentioned with the elephant and the rider, which we talked about in a previous episode, we can get very caught up in our beliefs and our truth and our wanting to advocate, and in the process harm relationships. I really love that very simple mantra. People
that was Oasis, right? Mm-hmm. Oasis, is that right?
Yep. Yeah, people are more important than beliefs.
Yeah, it's true.
Which both John and I have presented at Oasis locations. Yeah.
So Anne's challenging all three of us. Anne Jensen writes, the keep sweet approach, and that's a reference to Warren Jeffs. He used to control the women in the FLDS church. He used to have the saying, keep sweet. I think he even wrote keep sweet on his shoes. And when he put his shoes up on the table, he would send that message to the women, keep sweet, which means know your place, stay quiet, behave, don't speak out. So Anne writes, the keep sweet approach was giving my soul cavities. I am blunt and agitated, and many do not like this about me, but also may come to me for support, knowing I have said what they wish they could. I cannot shut up about the church's wrongs. Margie, is Anne wrong?
Natasha, is Anne wrong?
Well, what I would say is that Anne, does this approach work for you? And it sounds like in many ways it is. And so maybe Anne has the types of relationships that are resilient to her approach. Maybe Anne has the personality or mental health skills that help her kind of, have this approach. So great. That's why it isn't about wrong or right. It's about finding what works for you. And for some people to be an agitator and to be an advocate and to be very upfront and kind of firm is very healthy. And for others, taking a more passive approach, but still in a kind of an integritous way within their own kind of quiet mind is also very healthy. So this isn't about certain approaches being better than others. It's about knowing ourselves well enough to know if how we're going about these shifts and these relationships are enhancing our life or detracting from our life.
So well said. And that reminds me of how many times a values approach, why, you know, having people really sit down and consider what they value most in their relationships, let alone in their lives. There are so many values exercises that I think can be a great part of this part of transitioning, where it allows you to feel like, you know, it's self-honoring, the decisions that you're making. It's actually, you're being very present and honoring to the types of relationships you want moving forward.
And what I also want to say about Anne's approach that is a reality is that although she may be bothering or distancing certain people in her life, she's also accruing new relationships. And sometimes transitions in life are about that, are about finding a new tribe or parts of a new tribe, or finding new people that will, because I don't think it's healthy either to be the only person in your group that thinks a certain way. We need a little bit of confirmation bias to be healthy in our lives. We don't necessarily want to be all involved in confirmation bias, but we need people who are going to kind of get it and understand us. So what she's basically saying is that as she speaks up, although she may distance certain people, she's also gaining new relationships in her life. And that can be really very rewarding.
Can be huge.
It's huge.
One of the biggest gifts of a faith crisis can be a new set of authentic friendships or even family relationships that you never would have had if you hadn't have gone through the faith crisis. Mm-hmm. How many of us know that sibling, the scenario of that sibling or that uncle that was always kind of distant from all the family, that was kind of cut off because they fell away or made bad choices? And really what happened is they kind of got isolated and marginalized and cut off. And for all that time, we're living their truth, but also living alone, and we're sad to have been cut off. And as soon as they find out that someone in their family has had a faith crisis, you know, you make a new friend of a sibling or an aunt or uncle or a cousin that were lost. And now they can become some of the dearest, closest relationships you ever have, even sometimes more unconditionally loving and deeper and supportive than any current relationship you have. And so those are the hidden jewels in the gift of the faith crisis.
Yeah.
All right. Well, the next point we want to cover, and this, we're not going to try and cover all of this today, by the way. We're going to cover a point or two more, and then we'll do 2 hours today, and then we'll come back next week and do more. Is that okay, Natasha?
Yes, that would be great, because when you said, oh, we're going to be at it for 3 to 4 hours, I'm like, oh, really?
Talk about communication.
I do have children that come home in an hour, so.
Yeah, we got to get lunch. But also, I meant for the entire conversation, not just for today. So I think it'll take us 3 or 4 hours to cover everything we have today. But just we won't do it today. Is that okay?
Yes.
Okay. So the next topic that you guys have already touched upon, you know, we've talked about if to tell. You know, we've talked about if not to tell. We've talked about why tell or why not to tell. Now we're going to talk about who to tell and who not to tell, and maybe the priority of when to tell who. So my initial question and my thoughts was, number one, what are the factors to consider on whether or not to tell someone, and more specifically, who to tell? So you're thinking about, do I tell my parents? Do I tell my spouse? Do I tell my kids? You know, those are generally, you know, let's just say it's spouse or partner, children, siblings, and parents. Can we safely say that on average, that's kind of the inner ring. Now, there are always going to be step parents or adopted parents or just people, loved ones, grandparents who raised you. There are always going to be non-traditional families or foster scenarios or other scenarios where important people rise up who aren't immediate blood relatives. But what about this idea that generally speaking, it's kind of spouse, children, siblings, and parents who are our first obligation, generally speaking? Do you guys like that or not?
I don't know. For me personally, I think people may feel differently. And this is something maybe to reflect on. For me personally, spouse is a little bit different than children, but they're in the same kind of realm of circle, but they're clearly different because the nature of the relationship is different. And then parents and in-laws would be on a different level for me as well.
A more distant level.
Yeah.
Okay.
Spouse and then children. That's just for me personally. But I love the idea of asking the question. I think a lot of this should be a reflective exercise for the people who are in this situation of really thinking about, disclosing.
Now, knowing that your sibling is listening, where do siblings fall? If you've got significant other, ring 1, children, ring 2, and parents, ring 3, where do siblings fall for you, Margi? What are you keeping from Tim is basically what I'm asking.
I had a bit of a public disclosing. But I would say, siblings are not all created equal either, right? You can be closer to some siblings.
Some siblings can be your dearest, most close to trusted advisor, sometimes even more than your spouse.
So this is highly personal.
Okay.
And these are great questions for people to kind of consider as they go about it. A great pause.
What do you say, Natasha?
Yeah, I would say the only one that I would have very strong feelings about is a spouse.
Talk about that.
Well, assuming that you're in a relationship where the understood contract is that you are my primary person, that you are my primary confidant, that you and I have a level of relationship that we really don't share with other people. Now, not all marriages are created like that, and not all marriages have necessarily those assumptions. But if, I think for the most part in Western romantic kind of ideas about being married, we have this sense that a spouse is kind of on a different level from any other relationship, even dear friends. And so, and I think this is where there's the most potential for feelings of betrayal, feelings of how could you have kept something so intimate or so personal from me, especially for those who choose not to share or disclose with a spouse. That's going to be at a very different level of emotional reactivity than I think even a dear friend. I think everybody else is, maybe the second most feelings I have are with children, but again, adult children are very different than, a 3 to 5 year old child. But I guess my feelings are that we want to have authentic relationships with our children, and that all parents should have a right to that authenticity with their children. So I have very strong feelings about either a believing spouse keeping a faith transitioner from sharing things with their children, or a faith transitioner, making demands on a believing spouse to not share certain things about their beliefs with their children. I think that's a very important thing to negotiate right in the forefront of a faith transition, in a way that both parents can feel authentic, because I think that's a whole nother level of betrayal, is when you have a child, and I have a lot of adult children in my office who talk about this, that they then came to find out many, many, many years later that their parents had gone through something of a faith transition and kept it from them, or that one parent had different beliefs, or, so there's a lot of potential for betrayal there as well. So for me, it's spouse, then children, then everything else is kind of up for grabs, because I think that all of that really depends on the level of intimacy you have or want with different people in your life. So whether that's friends or siblings or parents.
What have you heard from children who were upset that their parents did not disclose? What just give us an example of 2 of how that can backfire on a parent.
Well, in particular, this shows up in the scenario where one of the parents stopped believing in an Orthodox way, but kept on attending church to keep the family peace, and, never disclosed any of that to the child. So maybe had historical information about the church that was never disclosed to the child, or who knows what, different scenarios. And now that child in their 30s or 40s is going through, or even their 20s is going through their own kind of critical thinking process, maybe coming across information, disclosing that to a parent, and the parent saying, oh yeah, I've known about that, or I felt that way too 10 years ago. And the kid being like, so you're saying I'm going through all this pain, all this angst, all this worry, all this, not knowing me how to manage my own relationships, and you've kept this from me, that can feel very off-putting to an adult child. So I don't think that that's helpful for a believing parent or a transitioning parent to have a child then really torqued off at both of them for having kept that type of dynamic secret.
Yeah, when it comes to missions, kids can get hurt on missions. I had a roommate at BYU who was killed on his mission. So a mission is a pretty serious decision. It's 2 years of your life. Education is a serious decision, and going to BYU to study elementary education because that's what good Mormon girls do versus pursuing a career because you decide that's what you want to do can be a very serious thing for a woman, as an example. And then who you marry, how soon you get married, how many kids you have, all those decisions are so significant. I would never want one of my kids to make any of those decisions under false pretenses and with a false understanding of where I stood regarding the church, such that they would go, oh, well, Dad believes, so I'm going on my mission. Dad believes I'm getting married in the temple. Dad believes I'm going to go work for CES, and then come back to me in their 30s and 40s and say, you mean you knew all this that whole time and you lied to us or hid it from us? And I now am not having the best marriage or chose a career I wouldn't have chosen. And I would never have done that if you had been honest with me. I don't mean to be all fear and gravity negativity based, but that's for me. I'm just echoing your feelings, Natasha and Margi, about the importance of disclosing to kids.
Yeah, and I just want to say that I think that there are wonderful ways to do mixed faith marriages where it doesn't have to be like, oh, the church isn't true or the church is true, or there's definitely ways that and we'll talk about that in many other episodes. So this isn't about, oh, one parent coming in and saying none of it is true, and therefore you now have to agree with me. There's mixed faith ways to do this very, very well and effectively. But again, I think believers need to understand, and faith transitioners probably already understand this, that a big part of faith transition anger is directed at the church because they feel that the church was not forthcoming with information. So you don't want, as a parent, to fall into that same category where all of that anger is now being directed at you because you weren't forthcoming with information with your children. And there's ways to do that are very effective. And again, even that protection intimacy, when we want to protect, especially older teens and young adults, that starts becoming an inappropriate type of relationship with children. We want to start the process of having our children become colleagues and peers, not under our kind of control as you would like a 6-year-old, right? That needs to be more under control. So all things that I'm sure we'll talk about much more in depth when we talk about kids.
Totally. All right. Victoria writes, great comment, very true, such good advice. Shout out to Victoria, our friend in the UK. We love you, Victoria. We're glad you joined us. And Margi, Tim's writing again. You want to read Tim's comment?
Sure. So he says, I agree with Natasha. Don't you put Margi on the spot. Spouse is intrinsically deeper and more important. Trust is the foundation of a spousal relationship, which is not to say it's not important in other relationships, but it's not the same, I don't think. I find family more important, and personal experience is that if you start with friends or those you know agree, you will be more centralized in anger or discontent or criticism. Your family, on the other hand, is about knowing you and the relationship.
Wow.
Really, really wise.
That Tim kid is wise.
He's super wise.
Are all Webbers that wise? Wait, that's putting you on the spot. Okay, I take it back. I respectfully withdraw the question. Kylie writes, let's see, thoughts on a spouse being present for the hard conversation my husband needs to have with his parents or the in-laws. Kylie, I'm going to hold off on answering that. We really want to answer that, but we're going to deal with that in another episode. But we want you guys to send your questions, and we will include them. So thank you, Kylie, for asking. All right, so we've sort of established that we owe our best to our significant other if we have one, and maybe children if we have them as a second tier. Let's just now go really broad, regardless of who we talk to. You know, Natasha, you shared early on in our retreats, and you talked about this in the 1 to 10 scale of assessing. I like to use a 1 to 5 scale just because it's a little bit of a narrow range. But tell us about your idea of pairing safety and value with disclosure, depending on who we're talking to. Do you mind sharing that idea?
Sure, I'll try my best. And some of this is also probably mirrored in Brene Brown's work on vulnerability. I think sometimes when we think about vulnerability or disclosure, integrity, authenticity, those are all words we resonate with. And so we just want to tell the world, we want to shout from the rooftops, and we want to show up. And then when we're surprised or, feel very rejected when that doesn't go well. And so I really like to look at this process as a two-way street. You can only control how much, you can do. You cannot control another person's response. And so you may be, and I do like to use a kind of a pretend measurement scale. So with 1 being, this isn't a person I'm very intimate with at all. Maybe we just barely know each other, say hello in the hallways at church. A 10 being, of intimacy being hopefully the ideal of what you'd want to be with a spouse. Although I think probably most of us are not at a 1 or a 10 with most anybody. We're somewhere in between. So if you're at, let's say, a very close friend of yours where you feel like you have a level 7 intimacy with them, and you start sharing some of these issues about faith transition, and the walls start going up and they get very defensive and upset with you, you may have to grieve the fact that even though you're doing your best work and you're giving that person time and you're giving that person your best process, that relationship may shift from a 7 to a 3, let's say. And there is grief work in that process. And even if you do all the suggestions and all the right things, that may never change. So I want to be very clear in just expectations. It's not that, if you follow Natasha and John and Margi's advice, everything will go peachy keen, because you have zero control over what's happening for that other person. And I think too, that the measurement scale is a good thing to assess just all of your current relationships, so kind of go through and say, okay, well, I think that I'm currently at an 8 with my spouse, or I think I'm currently at a 5 with my mother, or I think I'm currently at a 9 with my sister, and so depending on how you would measure those relationships, that probably is a good way to think about how much I want to start disclosing, how well I can project that it might go, because it's probably going to have more statistical probability that it will go well the closer, the more intimacy you have in that relationship to begin with. Again, not a guarantee, but and then sometimes it's more about accepting, what, I'm at a 5 with my mom. I wish we were at a 7. It may not happen. So I'm going to keep my relationship and my conversations at a level 5, which is kind of what happened with my mother-in-law. Like, I was trying to have a 7 with my mother-in-law when we're really more at a 5. And that's okay. And I had to accept that. And that was her boundary with me. And I had to just say, okay, I've got to accept that and enjoy the 5 I have and not worry about getting to the 7. So is that what you were looking for from me?
Yeah, that's really great. Just assess the, I like to look at it on a couple of axes. What's the safety? So if somebody's going to scream at you and abuse you verbally, you probably don't share with them a lot, or if at all, right? If they are the most unconditionally loving person that you know is going to love you no matter what, you could tell them you're a mass murderer and they're going to visit you in jail weekly for the rest of your life.
Wow.
There are those types of people. Then you know you're safe to tell them everything because they just love you that unconditionally and they're safe. So there's sort of the safety to you. And then there's also kind of the safety and value to them. I always use the extreme example of a 95-year-old dying grandmother who is a pioneer ancestry and the church means everything to her. She's got weeks to live. Do you need to sit down with her and explain to her polyandry and peepstones and Joseph's lying to Emma and you're leaving the church? Or do you just kind of focus on helping her have the happiest final moment she can in her life? There are probably also people that just need or choose faith because let's say I don't want to pathologize belief, but if somebody happens to be, let's say, a recovering addict or struggling with mental illness, or the church is kind of what keeps the wheels on their wagon, so to speak, why not just let them enjoy the church because it's really useful and meaningful to them? Why bother doing anything that could disrupt them? And I think Jeff mentioned that point earlier. So I like considering safety to you, safety to them, and also the value of disclosure. Sometimes it's going to be useful. Other times it might just be damaging and not useful. So, and of course there's always considerations like your job, inheritance, family relationships. So just be mindful of all that.
I just want to add one thing that with safety, I think is really important, especially when we said spouses are super important. But if there's some type of domestic violence, either physical or emotional, that is enough of a red flag to also consider whether or not or how you're going to disclose. So don't just assume all marriages are meant to be disclosed upon because your own safety may be at risk.
Right.
Absolutely. So those are some things to consider when disclosing. We like to talk about, and Natasha, you are really good about talking about this. One of the favorite words of doubting and post-Mormons is authenticity. Authenticity. Got to be honest. Got to be true. Got to speak my truth. And what I always like to remind people is that we're not, we don't just value one value. Yes, we value honesty and truth. But as my wife taught me early on in our marriage, as I tend to be very blunt and direct and candid, Margi said sometimes honesty without compassion is cruelty. And so we have other values in addition to honesty. We have the values of compassion and kindness and love and well-being of other people, and just the values of family relationships. So don't club people over the head with your values of honesty and authenticity at the expense of other values you cherish, such as kindness, compassion, and family, and love, and support for people's self-determination.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
The language that I use around this is systemic authenticity. So I think sometimes when we think about authenticity, we think that compromise is selling ourselves short. And so I think that compromise is part of any relationship and doesn't downplay our authenticity. And the silly example I give is that there's nothing authentic about me changing poopy diapers. I don't like the smell. It makes me have a little bit of a gag reflex. And yet I've changed thousands of poopy diapers my whole life. Why would I do something so inauthentic? And so, but the idea is systemically, I'm a mom or I'm an aunt or I'm a babysitter. And what is authentic is the care of that child. So I'm willing to do something distasteful or even something that I don't totally find pleasurable or helpful because I know it's helping the authentic relationship of my caretaking role in that particular situation. And this is why I think people can compromise on church attendance. And even when they garments and whether or not to have a coffee maker in the home or things like that, it doesn't take away from your authenticity, either as a believer or a non-believer, to compromise on those issues. It's more about, I'm choosing the authenticity of our relationship.
Love it. Erin Gluth Spencer's joined us. She writes, good points, John. Thank you, Erin. You're awesome. And Kristen Gluth Cranny, Erin's sister, is also joining us. Kristen, we'll have you know that before you joined us, we read a quote from you. So go back and listen if you want to hear yourself and your wisdom quoted. And Erin, we've got quotes from you coming up in our next episode. So lots of goodness from the Gluth sisters. Kristen writes, I find some true believing friends are safe and loving. They truly want to know what you're going through. Then you tell them openly and you tell them openly and honestly, and everything is great. But then they never call you again. Oh, well. That's hard, Kristen.
It's also true.
Yeah.
It is true.
And that's self-determination. I just believe that it's hard to maintain Orthodox faith in 2019. You really have to build walls because there's so much information, so many social justice causes, so many people leaving, that if you don't build walls really high around your faith sometimes, it won't survive. It's like these awful waves of truth and history and family members and LGBT stuff and feminism and social justice and racism pounding on Mormon testimonies in 2019. And so people know themselves, they have the right to self-determination, and some are going to decide that they can't have her, that this means the death of their relationship with you. We're going to talk about this at the end of the final episode in this series on coming out or disclosing. But the best you can do is accept their right to determination, support them, and then go out and find amazing other friends and community and family to replace the casualties of the friendships you lost. But my heart goes out to you, Kristen, for that happening. And I'm guessing you're not the only one listening to this episode who's had that happen.
I would also complicate this by saying that I think it's a normal response to grief. So even when you think of somebody dying in your life, or, if you're going through a very hard time in your life, oftentimes people in your support network will actually distance themselves from you instead of come to your support network. And we see that in a variety of settings. And I think it's because people have that anxiety of not knowing how to help or not knowing what to say or not. And so then that angst kind of keeps them almost subconsciously distant from you. So sometimes it's not even, I think, a conscious decision.
I can see that. And I also feel like this is one of those natural filtering things that happens amidst transitioning. And I actually view it now on the other side of that as a tremendous gift, because on the other side of that, what fills up in that space, and it's really important to note that for a time, for most people, or for a lot of people, you feel like you're losing more relationships than having, or finding new authentic ones, that it's normal to feel like you've got this vacuum of kind of relationships that have fallen away or been filtered out quite naturally. But it will come. It will come that you will build this and fill in that space with relationships where they're more authentic and honest than ever before. And they are the people who, when you lose a family member or you need, can absolutely show up for you. That's what I've found anyway. So a really natural filtering process that's been a tremendous gift for me in my life, because now I feel like I'm tending to relationships that truly matter and will last.
Love it. Stacy writes, referring to safety of others, disclosure and considering the safety of others. Stacy writes, like my missionary sister, who already suffers from anxiety, depression, and fibromyalgia. So she's on a mission, she's depressed, anxious, and has fibromyalgia. I haven't told her because she already has way too much stress and pressure on her plate. That sounds like a move for compassion, Stacy. And by the way, if a parent or a spouse or a sibling yells at you after for not disclosing, and your intent wasn't to hide so that you could do things that would violate their trust, but instead you chose to not disclose out of a sincere concern for them, you can tell them. You can tell them why you didn't disclose. I was just concerned about your health. You were struggling with a lot. You had a lot on your plate, and I just didn't want to add to it. And if they're healthy and reasonable, compassionate people, they'll understand. Don't you think? Maybe?
Yeah.
That was a lot of maybe.
It might take a minute.
Yeah.
I think that's
the whole thing. We keep coming back to that, right? Trying not to control reactions. People will have reactions that oftentimes may be hard for us to see.
And that's why we focus on repair attempts and ongoing process, because sometimes it takes a minute.
Yeah.
Kathy writes, Victoria writes, yes, Margi Dehlin. So you've got a fan in Victoria. Kathy writes, please address the pros and cons of disclosure. Now, Kathy, I'm guessing you joined us late because I think we really did cover a lot of that at the beginning. We talked about the benefits of disclosing include authenticity, increased emotional intimacy, honesty, integrity, a concern for others. Those are some of the things we mentioned. Some of the cons can be destroying relationships, harming relationships, eroding intimacy, risk of job loss, risk of being cut out of wills. Also, anything else? What am I not mentioning? The cons of disclosure.
And she just did say, she just came in.
Okay, yeah. Go back and listen, Kathy. If we didn't include cover those topics adequately, email us at mormonfaithcrisis@gmail.com. We'll cover them next week when we continue this episode. Kristen writes, thank you, y'all rock. I'm so thankful for these awesome podcasts and the opportunity to learn, grow, and contribute to the discussion. Kristen, you're awesome, and your sister's awesome, and I want to meet you guys someday, and we want to meet you guys someday. And thank you for the kind words. And also, you remind us, Kristen, as we are kind of wrapping up this episode, we want to remind everybody, we want to thank you for your support and just say, if you appreciate these podcasts, these videos, these resources, the website, the events, there's a few things you can do to support us. You can like our Facebook page. You can leave our Facebook page a positive review. Same with iTunes. Positive review really helps. You can donate 10, 15, 20, $100 a month, whatever you can afford. These donations are what keeps this possible. You aren't just paying for yourself. You will be paying it forward to generations of people who will benefit from this content. So please support us if you can. Please spread the word. Please share these episodes with friends and family that you think could benefit from this. We consciously try and keep the discourse at a level that would feel safe or comfortable, or at least as much as possible with believing family and friends. So we hope you'll share and spread the word and let people know about this. And then, of course, we've got these events, these workshops coming up. We've already discussed them, but for those who are joining us late, we'll be in Vegas, next week, February 22nd, 23rd, this week. Natasha's doing a Mormon Matters retreat with Dan Witherspoon, March 1st through 3rd. We'll have some information up about that very soon on mormonfaithcrisis.com/events. We're doing Ogden in March. We're doing a mixed faith marriage stuff in April. Oklahoma City in April, if someone volunteers to work with Natasha. Gilbert, Arizona in May. We're doing a conference for people who are leaving the church or have left the church in Salt Lake City in June. Switzerland in June, Colorado in August, Kansas City in September, Southern California September. Lots of events coming up. And then there's the free Mormon Faith Crisis events in Salt Lake City, one each month that I'm conducting. Margi's going to be coming to some of those. The next one's March 13th in Holiday. Support these events. We won't do the events if people don't sign up, but if people do sign up, it's an amazing way to meet people nearby who need support, who can be your friends, who can be a support to you, and who can be, all of you can build a community of support for each other. So thanks to everyone who makes this possible. Thanks to everyone who's joined us today. Thanks to everyone who's joined us live. Your comments have made all this much better. For those of you whose comments we weren't able to discuss today, like Aaron just asked, I'm wondering, in a marriage, if not disclosing true feelings could compromise trust, how important is it to keep spouses in the loop to go through the changes together? Aaron, I think we did talk about that earlier in today's episode. So for those of you who didn't hear the earlier part of this episode, please check it out. I think we'll cover a lot of your questions there. And there are others as well. But we also want you to know, Joe writes, what is it called where you can't convince someone with evidence when they came to their beliefs by emotion? We call that the elephant and the rider. That comes from Jonathan Haidt. Joe, we've talked about that in prior episodes. Look up the book called The Righteous Mind by Jonathan Haidt. Haidt is spelled H-A-I-D-T. And it's just this idea that we make decisions emotionally and then use reason or logic to justify through confirmation bias. And so, as we've said before, you can't deconvert someone intellectually from a position that they arrived at emotionally. That's The Rider and the Elephant, Jonathan Haidt. And you'll hear it in past, present, and future episodes on the gift of the Mormon faith crisis. Thanks for asking that, Joe. Tammy says Margi's skin is amazing. Thank you, Tammy.
Oh, thanks, Tammy.
And
that's due to a great vacation in the sun.
Yeah, vacation in Mexico doesn't hurt. And Victoria writes, it's probably all the meditation she does. Yes, meditation is the cure to skin blemishes.
It's the gift that keeps on giving.
So thanks for joining us, everybody. Please spread the word. And we are going to come back next Tuesday with the conclusion to this topic of coming out or disclosing to believing family.
Yes.
So please join us for more episodes coming soon to Mormon Faith Crisis podcast near you.
Yes. Good to be with you all today.
Anything you want to say to close, Margi?
Just a great episode. Really, really happy people participated.
Natasha, final word, Natasha.
No, I agree. I love having everybody comment, and it just really adds to the depth and just the meaning of these conversations that we're having. I'll also just say, if anybody wants to steal me away from Oklahoma City or Kansas City, it's anywhere I can drive. So if anybody's in Omaha or the Dallas, Texas, or north of that, reach out to me. So I'll make those weekends happen.
Same with us. If Cedar City or St. George or Logan or, Idaho, anywhere you think 20 people or more might be able to gather, we would love to have you host a workshop. West Valley, South Jordan, wherever. And we've got, did I mention Ogden and Davis County coming up? Yeah, March 8th and 9th. So anyway, please do reach out. We'd love to spread the love. And Aaron is arguing for Northwest Arkansas, Natasha. So
hey, you got a house? I'll be there.
To organize something in Arkansas. That'd be fun. So who doesn't want to go?
I would love to go to Arkansas.
Hey,
no shaming the Midwest. We are awesome.
Not here.
Or the Northeast, New England, South. I'd love to come back to Dallas or Houston, Austin, San Antonio. We want to do events wherever there's a need. So let's do it.
Yep. Great.
All right. Thanks, everybody. We love you. Please join us again soon at MormonFaithCrisis.com for more episodes on this podcast. Take care, everybody. Thanks so much.
See you next time.
Goodbye.
Thanks, Natasha. You're awesome.
You guys are awesome too. Thanks.
You too. You're awesome. All right. See everybody.